Hello there, and welcome to my series of videos on how to make wooden fairy houses. I have made a variety of fairy houses over the last 5 years. Here are some examples of my fairy houses. Before you build your fairy house, there are some things you need to consider. It's going to determine how this fairy house is made. Are you going to have this house inside or outside? Inside houses are a lot easier to make because you can use easier and cheaper adhesives versus outside. Is your fairy house for show, or are you going to play with it, or are children going to play with it? I have built some houses for kids, and I can tell you that they get a lot more wear and tear and stuff breaks a lot more, so you're going to need to make it more durable if it's something that's going to be played with. Last, you need to figure out what your budget is. The fairy houses that I made, I knew I was going to make a bunch of them, so I was willing to invest some money into the tools I need and in the materials I need. If you're only going to make one of these, then you could probably go a cheaper route. Ask around for tools and supplies, get on Nextdoor, ask around for plywood and materials. If you are going to make more than one of these, I would suggest that you invest in some materials. It'll make your job easier down the road. All right, let's talk about supplies. The first thing you're going to need, of course, for a wooden fairy house is wood. These are pieces that I picked up at the woods near my house. Now, I had borrowed my neighbor's chainsaw to get these pieces because they're pretty big. But if you don't have a chainsaw or you don't want to use one, you can get yourself one of these or borrow one of these, and then you can go get some smaller pieces like this to make a smaller fairy house. If you're going to make a big fairy house, you are going to need to get some big pieces. You might find somebody who's chopped down a tree who's willing to give you some pieces, and that'll save you a lot of work. Otherwise, you're going to have to do this yourself. I also use that chainsaw to cut pieces like this, which I like to call tree cookies. In order to cut big pieces like that, I needed a chainsaw. I use these for different levels of my tree house, but for the smaller pieces that I use for the table, I use my table saw. These are called tree cookies. You're going to need some tree cookies, and we'll talk about why and when later. You are also going to need plywood. I purchased this 2-foot by 4-foot by 1/2 inch plywood, exterior pine from Lowe's for $20. I was able to get all the pieces made out of this one piece of wood. You can certainly make a smaller house and spend less money. And as far as tools go, an electric drill, an assortment of drill bits, and drill cutters. Now, I did invest in this 2.5 inch circular drill bit and in this 1.5 inch drill bit. This is what I use to make my small doors. This is what I use to make my large doors. That cuts the basic shape. And then I use an assortment of paddles to dig that out. So this is a step you can skip if you don't plan on making holes in your wood. You could also just drill a small hole with this guy. That works perfectly well, and I'll show you how that works later. But you do need a drill and drill bits, at least for the fasteners. You also need some kind of saw. I use a reciprocating saw, and I also have a table saw. Both of those work really well for me, and I do sometimes use a hand saw if it's a small piece. Next, you're going to need some fasteners, a way to attach those pieces of wood to your plywood. Wood glue does work, but it won't do the full trick. So I have invested, this is where it gets kind of expensive. I've got a 1 5/8 deck screw, or exterior screw, and a 2.5 inch. These two sizes pretty much do everything I need. You don't have to invest in these though. You can just get some screws. Just make sure they're long enough to hold that wood on there. You're also going to need some exterior paint, sandpaper, and brushes. You're also going to need adhesives. I've been making my houses to be outside, so these are my two favorite outside glues, the Ultimate Wood Glue. You have to make sure it says waterproof exterior, interior, because the first time I did this, I did only interior, and that was a big problem when I put my house outside. This Ultimate Glue I got at Michael's. It's excellent inside and outside. It's not terribly cheap, so make sure you use your Michael's coupon before you get it, but it works great on smaller items to glue together. Of course, there's also Gorilla Glue too, but I haven't been super impressed with how this works outside, even though it does say waterproof, so I would keep this for only inside applications. Okay, the first thing I need to do is figure out which pieces of wood I'm going to use and how I want it to look. So I'm going to use these two big pieces as my base. I'm going to make a pretty big fairy house with multiple bottom wood pieces and then a single top layer, I think. So I've chosen these two pieces because they're interesting looking, and I can see there's a nice, pretty flat spot there. I could put a nice door, really big door, that'll look good. So I'm going to use that one on one side, and then I found this piece. Now I've already cut these so that the top is pretty level for my second level. And I think on this one, I'll put a door, maybe up higher. It doesn't work when the door is tilted this way because then the door doesn't shut, it just flops open. So you need to pick a spot that's either straight up and down or slightly tilted backwards. Maybe I'll put this one over here somewhere. Either way, I'm going to make a pretty big base because I also want to include a pond on this one and the usual stuff that goes around it. So I think that this one is going to be about this big. And then to make it interesting, I don't make it perfectly round. I kind of make it kind of lumpy-dumpy like that. Now I need to cut this. Okay, there it is. Now, if you don't have a reciprocating saw, I notice that the hardware store sells square pieces of wood. You might just have a square base. Not as exciting, but certainly keeps you from having to buy a saw if you don't have one. Okay, now I need to figure out what I want on the top here. I'm assuming I'm going to have a piece here and probably a piece right here. If I angle it that way, I could put a ladder between them, so that looks pretty good. Now, I did cut these earlier so that they're fairly flat, not quite. I could actually do two different circles, so maybe I'll do that instead. I'm gonna make one on the small piece, maybe right here, like branches on a tree, and I'll make another one that'll be on that one. Let's do that. Okay, I've cut them all out. Now, I forgot to mention, on some of my houses, I did actually use my chainsaw to cut bigger tree cookies. This was one piece and then it started to split. One of the problems with this is, one, it's hard to do, especially if you don't have a chainsaw, it's impossible. But two, as the wood dries, you do sometimes end up with this sort of thing and all the bark falls off. So you have to really make sure to seal this one better. The plywood's actually a lot easier to work with. So unless you have a bunch of those lying around, just stick with the plywood. Okay, so this is what I've got going on here. I'm gonna have probably something here. And it doesn't have to decide right now what's going to be where, but I have three pieces, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. It's going to be like that. And then I can add more wood, more logs on top of these to go up a level. But right now I'm going to start with this and see where we get to. My next step is to sand all these rough edges off and paint them. Sanding block with 80 grit paper. The purpose of the sanding is not to necessarily get a smooth surface, but to get rid of some of these rough edges so you don't get slivers. So you just need to sand a little bit on the edges. Once you've sort of broken off those little sharp pieces, that's all you need to do. Okay, now that I've sanded those edges off, it's time to paint. In the past, I have used this Rust-Oleum. It's a nice thick paint, but I have found that in outside situations, I think what's happening is the wood is getting moisture and kind of buckling. This paint kind of flakes off, even though I'm very surprised at that. Maybe because it's meant for metal. Inside, it's great. So I'm gonna try this paint now. It's an exterior paint with primer in it, and I've tinted it green. So I'm hoping this is gonna do a better job on my outside fairy house. Time will tell. Okay, I'm finished painting all three pieces, and I would like to mention that this Valspar exterior paint that I got in tinted green is an exterior paint. It cost me about 15 bucks. Not the cheapest paint on the planet, but I'm hoping it's gonna hold up to the test of time. I've only used about this much of it though. Still got a lot in there, so I'm gonna get quite a few fairy houses out of this. If you're gonna be making your fairy house for inside, you certainly do not need to spend the money on this paint. Get something cheaper. So now I'm gonna let this dry and then I'm gonna apply a second coat. Okay, while we're waiting for that paint to dry, we can work on putting our doors into our wood. When I stood this piece of wood up, I need to kind of see where it's leaning back so the door will stay shut on its own, unless I want to put some kind of eye hook on it. I'm gonna guess like right here is where my door is gonna be. I could put it on this side. Nah, I think I'll put it right there. And I think I'm gonna raise it off the ground a little bit so that I can put like a little ladder or something there. That's always fun. So I'm gonna put it right here. And for this, I'm gonna use a 1.5 inch blade on my drill. There, that's gonna be a cute little hole. Cute little place for my door. See? Little hole there. On my second piece of wood, I've got a little spot here where the two pieces kind of met. I think I'm gonna put my second one back there. That looks good. Time to put my second coat of paint on. It's been about 2 hours, so my directions say go ahead and apply that second coat. So that's what I'm gonna do. So after looking at my house and realizing I only have the 2 tiny doors, I decided to add one of the bigger doors on this side, and this is how we do that. I'm gonna use my big drill bit just to give me kind of a template. You can see it doesn't actually cut the door out because it's meant to cut plywood. Next, I'm going to carve it out using the paddles. So this wood is soft enough because it's been in my garage for a while that pretty much works. It's not a perfect curve. You can see the outside's falling off here. That's okay. It'll still be good. I was able to carve some more out of there, and I can make that as deep as I want or as smooth as I want. And now it's time to put it all together. I have to figure out how I want this situated. Here's my big door. I think I'll have it facing outward, kind of to here. Well, maybe like that. And here's my other little door right on this side. See? So I'm going to face it like this. Now I have to attach them. Part can be a little tricky. So with run screw in, and figure out what direction I want everything facing. All right, that's pretty stable. It's not going anywhere. There's my first one. I'm gonna do the same to the other one too. Alrighty, there we go. Now I gotta add second levels. So I put 2 screws in this one, but only 1 screw in each one of these. They seem pretty solid. I probably don't need a second screw. Worst comes to worst, they'd rotate, but I think they're fine. That looks pretty good. Well, this is the end of part 1 video, creating the basic shape for your tree house. We have created a base, we've put on 2 different logs, and we've put on 3 different upper balconies. Now, there's no reason you couldn't continue this onward. Some of my houses have been really big. I've added more like small things like this and then another level. Go crazy with it. We're gonna add other stuff in other videos, but for now, we've done what we set out to do. We have taken some wood and created the basic shape for our outdoor fairy house made out of wood.